the chairman of the board, in other words, one of the greatest entertainers of all time. We are talking about Frank Sinatra.
He's hailed as the most iconic cultural figure of the 20th century, and tomorrow he would have turned 100 years old.
For over half a century, Frank Sinatra didn't just sing, he mesmerized. With every smoky note and every perfectly tailored suit, he crafted a life of opulence, intrigue, and unimaginable success. From sold-out concerts to secretive business deals, Sinatra wasn't only building a legacy, he was stacking a fortune that would make headlines long after his final bow. But how much did he leave behind, and who inherited it all? Stay with us as we peel back the curtain on the staggering wealth Sinatra passed on to his family. The hidden battles of Frank Sinatra. He had the voice that could still a room and the look that made headlines. Frank Sinatra didn't just perform, he owned the stage, the screen, and the front page. With a tilt of his hat and that unforgettable grin, he turned charisma into currency. Fans couldn't get enough, and neither could Hollywood. But while the world swooned over Old Blue Eyes, few knew just how much he was silently fighting to hold it all together. Born in Hoboken, New Jersey, Sinatra's rise from a modest Italian-American household to worldwide fame was the stuff of American legend. But the spotlight he chased came with a heavy price. Beneath the tailored suits and swagger was a man constantly battling pressure, doubt, and the weight of his own myth. His journey wasn't a clean arc, it was riddled with collapse, reinvention, and deeply buried scars. In the 1940s, he was everywhere. On the radio, in magazines, surrounded by screaming fans and industry titans. But just as fast as the world embraced him, it turned cold. A sudden hemorrhage in his vocal cords nearly ended his singing career overnight. The voice that built his empire faltered, and as critics pounced, rumors of mob connections and diva-like tantrums began swirling. His carefully crafted image of charm and control took a hit, and behind closed doors, the strain began to show. Yet Sinatra wasn't one to fade quietly. Against the odds, he roared back. His Oscar-winning role in From Here to Eternity in 1953 redefined him not just as a singer, but a serious actor. Hollywood, once skeptical, now stood at attention. But even that dramatic comeback didn't wipe away the emotional wear and tear. By the time he reached the peak of his fame again, the lifestyle had grown bigger and more expensive. Sinatra indulged with abandon. Palatial homes in Beverly Hills, Malibu, and Palm Springs, custom-built cars, expensive jewelry for his ever-changing list of lovers, nothing was out of reach. The glamour was real, but so was the chaos it left in its wake. Each of his 4 marriages, starting with Nancy Barbato and ending with Barbara Marx, added layers of drama and heartbreak. Divorce settlements and personal betrayals chipped away at more than just his bank account. Even in his later years, Sinatra couldn't slow down. The stage became his second skin, a place where he could pretend the whispers didn't exist, where the spotlight drowned out the loneliness. Friends noticed how relentless he was, touring far past the age when most artists retire. His voice no longer soared as it once did, but he kept going, perhaps more out of fear of fading than love of music. And when he passed away in 1998, the public tributes poured in, but behind the scenes, things weren't so polished. Family members found themselves questioning the true scope of his estate. There were whispers of missing royalties, unclaimed assets, and secret recordings never meant for release. Had everything really been accounted for? Or had pieces of Sinatra's empire slipped quietly into shadowy corners, lost to time, or buried by those who knew too much? The world knew Frank Sinatra as a legend in the spotlight, but offstage, his life was far more complicated, shaped by both dazzling success and private struggle. And the more we peel back the layers, the more we realize that the man behind the music was always chasing something far greater than fame. Now, let's go back and see how a kid from Hoboken became Old Blue Eyes, a legend shaped by fame he never fully embraced. The bruised beginning of Frank Sinatra. Born on December 12, 1915, in the cramped kitchen of a Hoboken apartment, Francis Albert Sinatra came into the world bruised, silent, and blue, literally. The forceps used to deliver him left deep marks along his face and neck, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he wasn't breathing. As the doctor turned his attention to saving Sinatra's mother, it was his grandmother who refused to accept the stillness. She rushed the limp baby under cold water, slapped his back, and just like that, Frank Sinatra gasped to life. It was a brutal start, but perhaps fitting for a man who would spend his entire life defying odds. Even his name came by accident. He was meant to be named after his father, Martin, but a mix-up during baptism left him with his godfather's name, Frank. His mother, exhausted and likely irritated, didn't bother to correct it. And just like that, Frank Sinatra was born, not just in flesh, but in myth. That early trauma left more than emotional scars. The facial damage from the forceps earned him cruel nicknames like Scarface from local kids. As he got older, Sinatra became obsessed with masking those marks using thick makeup and clever lighting. The insecurities were planted early and would haunt him, even at the peak of his fame. Despite growing up in a bustling, mostly Italian-American neighborhood, Sinatra's childhood was remarkably lonely. As an only child in a community where large families were the norm, he often felt like the odd one out. His father, Marty, ran a bar and moonlighted as a boxer, while his mother, Dolly, worked as a midwife and wielded serious political influence in Hoboken, especially as a ward leader in the Democratic Party. But their busy schedules meant young Frank was often left in the care of his grandmother, surrounded by noise but starved for companionship. In a later interview with journalist Pete Hamill, Sinatra confessed, "I used to wish I had an older brother that could help me when I needed him. I wished I had a younger sister I could protect." It was a quiet but heartbreaking glimpse into a childhood that often felt empty, despite being surrounded by people. Music became his escape. Inspired by Bing Crosby's smooth crooning, Sinatra started mimicking what he heard, eventually sneaking into clubs just to sing. At first, his father dismissed it as a distraction from a real career. But Dolly, recognizing her son's ambition, started pulling strings. She bought him sheet music, sound equipment, and used her connections to land him gigs. Her influence got him into a local group, the Hoboken Four, which gave him a taste of performance life. But even then, it was clear Frank wanted more. After the Hoboken Four split, Sinatra hustled, waiting tables by day, singing with local bands by night. His big break came when trumpeter Harry James noticed his talent and brought him on. That led to Tommy Dorsey, who in 1940 gave Sinatra a national platform. By 1942, Sinatra's fame was already outshining Dorsey's, paving the way for a solo career that would make him a global icon. And as Sinatra began carving his own space in the music world, comparisons were inevitable. But what came next would set him apart for good. Echoes and rivals. When the spotlight shifted. Long before he was a star, a teenage Frank had plastered Bing Crosby's picture on his bedroom wall. Crosby's effortless tone and smooth delivery didn't just inspire Sinatra, they shaped his earliest dreams. He listened, studied, and mimicked. In 1935, Frank caught a brief glimpse of his idol at a Newark club. But back then, he was just another kid with big hopes. A decade later, the tables had turned. Sinatra wasn't just famous, he was a sensation, with mobs of Bobby Soxer girls screaming his name and fainting at shows. Crosby still had fans, but the tide had shifted.
As they called him, was told over and over again. He was the friend of the beautiful and the powerful, idolized too by the new breed.
And Frank was the new voice of a generation. To the press, the contrast was irresistible. Crosby, Ever the Gentleman, once joked, "Sinatra's the kind of singer that comes around once in a lifetime, but why did it have to be my lifetime?" That single quote was all it took to fan the flames of a media rivalry. Soon, playful jabs and on-air barbs became a regular back and forth between the two crooners. The public ate it up, but behind the microphones, the rivalry was mostly harmless. Eventually, they even shared the screen in high society in 1956, proving that mutual respect could outlast the headlines. But not every competitor was welcomed so warmly. By the early 1950s, Sinatra's career was wobbling, and any fresh talent felt like a threat. When a rising young star named Eddie Fisher began gaining traction, Sinatra spiraled. The fear of being replaced gnawed at him. He'd been the voice of wartime romance, but times were changing, and he wasn't sure he fit in anymore. Still, no challenge rattled him more than Jimmy Roselli. Roselli wasn't just another singer. He was younger, Italian-American like Frank, and hailed from the same Hoboken streets. His vocal range was astounding, and he quickly earned the loyalty of the Italian-American community.
Important Italian singers is performing in Atlantic City this weekend. At the age of 72, Jimmy Roselli,
including Sinatra's own mother, Dolly. That stung. But the final straw came when Roselli declined to perform at a charity event Dolly had asked him to join, unless he was paid. Sinatra took it personally and used his influence to quietly push Roselli out of the industry. To many, it seemed like overkill. To Frank, it was survival. Sinatra could laugh with friends, collaborate with idols, and charm an audience in seconds. But when it came to protecting his place in the spotlight, he rarely played nice. And while Sinatra guarded his spotlight like a fortress, his private life, especially his love life, was far less under control. The women behind the legend. Before the world knew his name, Nancy Barbato already knew his smile. She met Frank in 1934, when he was a smooth-talking teenager with big dreams and empty pockets. By 1939, they were married. Their home was humble, their meals modest, pasta without meat, ties stitched from scraps. But their love was real. Nancy didn't just support his ambition. She built a life around it. Together, they had 3 children: Nancy, born in 1940, Frank Jr. in 1944, and Tina in 1948. As Sinatra's fame soared, it was this first family who watched him change, from devoted husband and father to a man pulled away by flashbulbs and endless applause. The more the world screamed for Sinatra, the more distant he became from the family he'd built. Affairs weren't just whispers. They were headlines. He gifted Nancy's jewelry to mistresses and hid glossy photos of Hollywood beauties in his wallet. The final blow came with Ava Gardner. Ava wasn't just another lover. She was the storm that swept him away. Their passion was electric, but their relationship bordered on destructive. Behind closed doors, their love was fueled by jealousy, alcohol, and emotional warfare. Gardner became pregnant twice during their relationship. Both pregnancies ended in abortion. One was driven by personal chaos, the other by fear of losing her MGM contract. Sinatra was devastated, and when she confessed to an affair with a Spanish bullfighter, he spiraled. At his lowest, he attempted to kill himself more than once. Still, the woman he always circled back to was Nancy. Even after divorcing her to marry Ava, she remained quietly present. She never remarried, not because she couldn't, but because no one else could compare. Years later, when the spotlight had dimmed, Frank would return to her kitchen for eggplant sandwiches she had frozen just for him, not as a star, but as the man she'd loved since they were teenagers. Then came Mia Farrow. Barely 21, she married Sinatra in 1966. He was in his 50s. The whirlwind union made headlines, but it didn't last long. When she chose to film Rosemary's Baby instead of appearing in Sinatra's movie, The Detective, he sent her divorce papers on set. Despite the abrupt end, Farrow continued to speak of him with warmth, calling him the great love of her life. His final marriage was to Barbara Marx, a former showgirl and the widow of Zeppo Marx. By the time she came into his life, the chaos had softened. Their romance was quiet and lasting. It took Barbara 5 years to say yes to marriage, and even then she whispered, "Mrs. Sinatra," when making dinner reservations, as though still adjusting to the weight of it. They wed in 1976 and stayed together until he died in 1998. But in the final stretch of his life, despite the devotion of Barbara, the echo of Mia, and the memory of Ava, his heart, or at least part of it, never fully left Nancy. She was the one who knew him before the fame, before the suits, before the chaos. And in her quiet kitchen, she kept loving him, not for who the world believed he was, but for who she knew he had once been. And just as his relationships burned hot and complicated, Sinatra's Hollywood story came packed with its own drama, both on camera and behind the scenes. The actor he was never meant to be. Though he once famously scoffed, "Pictures stink," Sinatra couldn't seem to stay away from the screen. His early film roles in the 1940s, like Las Vegas Nights and Higher, were more about his singing than acting. He wasn't taken seriously as a dramatic performer, and he didn't yet believe he belonged in front of a camera. By the early 50s, both his film and music careers were fading fast. Studios were moving on, and audiences had cooled. At one point, Sinatra didn't even have a contract. Just long walks across studio lots, hoping someone would take a chance. That chance finally came in 1953 with From Here to Eternity. As Private Maggio, Sinatra delivered a gritty, emotional performance that stunned Hollywood and won him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. It changed everything. What followed were darker, more daring roles. In The Man with the Golden Arm, in 1955, he portrayed a heroin addict, a bold move at the time. The Manchurian Candidate in 1962 showcased his chilling portrayal of a brainwashed soldier, and critics hailed it as his most powerful performance. Sinatra himself called it the peak of his acting career. And then came the Rat Pack era. With Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, Sinatra brought swagger and spontaneity to the Las Vegas stage. Their film Ocean's 11 turned them into cultural icons. Even John F. Kennedy was drawn into their orbit, charmed by their charisma and quick wit. Of course, not everything glittered. Sinatra turned down the lead in Dirty Harry, a decision that made Clint Eastwood a star. Films like Dirty Dingus McGee flopped. He clashed with directors, walked off sets, and refused to play by Hollywood's rules. But even into the 1980s, Sinatra pushed forward. In The First Deadly Sin, his final major film role, he gave a weary, understated performance that reminded critics he still had it. By then, his place in cinema history was sealed, not just as a singer who acted, but as an unpredictable, magnetic force who always left audiences guessing. But behind all the glitz, something darker was always looming. Whispers, FBI files, and rumors that hinted at a side of Sinatra few dared to confront. Stick around, because that story is just beginning. Sinatra and the shadows, the mob rumors he couldn't shake. Frank Sinatra never liked to admit it, but his name was never far from the mafia's orbit. From smoky back rooms to glittering casinos, Sinatra's connections to some of America's most notorious mobsters became one of the most controversial footnotes of his fame. While he brushed off the talk as gossip, the FBI spent nearly 5 decades quietly gathering over 2,400 pages on him, tracking everything from suspected favors to death threats and extortion plots. He wasn't subtle about the company he kept. Sinatra was known to socialize with Sam Giancana, the infamous Chicago mob boss, and the Fischetti brothers, Joseph and Charles, key players in illegal gambling. In Detroit, he was seen partying with Anthony and Vito Giacalone, and while others tiptoed around mob associations, Sinatra openly performed shows as personal favors, made business deals with known gangsters, and even sponsored mobster Johnny Roselli's entry into the exclusive Friars Club in Beverly Hills. Sinatra's godfather, Willie Moretti, underboss of the Genovese crime family, allegedly helped him get out of his contract with bandleader Tommy Dorsey, a move some claim wasn't entirely peaceful. And in 1946, when the Mafia held its infamous Havana Conference in Cuba, Sinatra was there too, sharing space with the likes of Lucky Luciano. Newspapers didn't hold back either, with headlines like "Shame Sinatra," painting him as more mobster than musician. He invested in casinos, too. In 1960, Sinatra bought a stake in the Cole Neva Lodge and Casino near Lake Tahoe. He turned it into a celebrity hotspot, attracting stars like Marilyn Monroe and Lucille Ball. But when Giancana was seen on the property in 1963, Sinatra's gambling license was suspended. Under pressure from both the FBI and the Nevada Gaming Commission, he gave up his shares in the Cal Neva and the Sands, two glamorous ventures tainted by underworld ties. His friendship with President John F. Kennedy only added fuel to the fire. As Sinatra got closer to the White House, the mob grew wary. Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General at the time, was cracking down on organized crime, and that made Sinatra a risky associate. Still, through it all, Sinatra denied any wrongdoing. "Any report that I fraternized with goons or racketeers is a vicious lie," he once said. But the stories and the shadow they cast never quite went away. But behind the curtain of Vegas shows and mob whispers, Sinatra's most enduring legacy may not be the albums or accolades. It's the children who bore both his name and his burdens. Sinatra's children and the name that never faded. Nancy Sinatra, his firstborn, didn't just inherit her father's talent. She redefined it. With sharp bangs, bold boots, and a voice laced with attitude, she charged into the 1960s music scene like a revolution in high heels. "These Boots Are Made for Walkin'" wasn't just a chart topper, it became an anthem. Yet behind her confident stage persona was a childhood filled with discipline, shadowed by fame, and shaped by a man who expected nothing short of excellence. From duets with Lee Hazelwood to starring alongside Elvis Presley, Nancy made her mark. But she didn't stop there. Her recent focus on preserving her family's legacy through archival projects and her boutique ventures proves she's still steering her own path, long after the spotlight has dimmed for others. Her younger brother, Frank Sinatra Jr., faced a far more complicated journey. While music pulsed through his veins, bearing the Sinatra name came with heavy expectations and real danger. In 1963, at just 19 years old, Frank Jr. was gaining attention in the jazz circuit, performing at Harrah's Club Lodge in Lake Tahoe. But one night, his rising fame turned terrifying. Two strangers tricked their way into his dressing room and abducted him at gunpoint. His friend, left tied and blindfolded, managed to escape and alert authorities. The ransom demand came swiftly, $240,000. Frank Sr., desperate and shaken, paid without hesitation, working alongside the FBI to ensure his son's safety. Hours later, Jr. was found walking alone through Bel Air, shaken but alive. Though the kidnappers were eventually captured and convicted, tabloids couldn't resist spinning rumors, even accusing Frank Jr. of staging the abduction for publicity. But the FBI's findings debunked it all. Frank Jr. went on to perform for decades, even leading his father's orchestra. But the shadow of his lineage never truly let him shine alone. He died in 2016, quietly and respectfully, having spent a lifetime both honoring and surviving the Sinatra legacy. And then there was Tina, never chasing stages or microphones, but no less pivotal. She didn't want the spotlight. Instead, she became the architect of remembrance, preserving her father's image with fierce loyalty. Producing the Sinatra miniseries, overseeing estate affairs, and writing a memoir that revealed both wounds and wonder, Tina has quietly become the final guardian of the Sinatra name. watching over it from Beverly Hills, where the echoes of Old Blue Eyes still linger in every corner. But even with his children proudly carrying the torch, one name still lingers at the edge of Frank's legacy: Ronan Farrow. Who is he, and what's his connection? Let's find out. The Sinatra shadow over Ronan Farrow. Ronan Farrow, journalist, activist, Rhodes Scholar, rose to fame on his own merits. But in 2013, the world did a double take when his mother, Mia Farrow, casually dropped a bombshell in Vanity Fair. Frank Sinatra, not Woody Allen, might be Ronan's real father. No DNA test, no further explanation. Just one cryptic word: possibly. The internet lit up. Side-by-side photos of Ronan and Sinatra made headlines. Their piercing gaze, angular features, and even the rhythm in Ronan's occasional Sondheim ballads. Everything seemed to whisper a strange truth no one dared confirm. But there was more than just looks. As a child, Ronan spent time around the Sinatra family. Nancy Sinatra Sr. welcomed him, treated him like one of her own, and Mia never hid her lasting affection for Frank, even calling him the love of my life, years after their split. Ronan, however, grew up under the legal parentage of Woody Allen, a relationship marked more by emotional distance than paternal warmth. That fragile bond shattered entirely when Mia discovered Allen's affair with her adopted daughter, Soon Yi, a betrayal that plunged the family into chaos. Allegations of abuse soon followed from Dylan Farrow, another of Mia's children, a claim Woody has always denied, but one that still casts a long shadow. And yet, through scandal and speculation, Ronan kept rising. A child prodigy who finished college at 11 and graduated from Yale Law by 21, he's never publicly embraced or rejected the Sinatra theory. Instead, he once tweeted with a smirk, "Listen, we're all possibly Frank Sinatra's son." A joke, or maybe a quiet truth hidden in plain sight. That's a juicy topic we'll explore in another video. But for now, let's turn to Frank Sinatra's final chapter, and how it all came to a close. The final curtain falls. By the time the 1990s rolled in, Sinatra's health had begun to mirror the weight of his decades-long reign. Between recurring bouts of pneumonia, high blood pressure, bladder cancer, and the creeping grip of Alzheimer's, the once untouchable star began to dim. Despite announcing retirement back in 1971, he never truly left the stage until 1995, proof that the spotlight had become his second home. His final moments came quietly, but not without weight. On May 14, 1998, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, Frank Sinatra suffered a fatal heart attack. He was 82. At his bedside were the people who had once lived in his shadow, but always held his heart: his wife, Barbara Marx, and his 3 children, Nancy, Frank Jr., and Tina. Those closest to him recalled that Sinatra, sharp even in decline, seemed to sense the end. His last words, spoken softly to Barbara, were chilling in their simplicity: "I'm losing." But even in death, he remained unmistakably himself, buried with a Zippo lighter, a pack of Camel cigarettes, a bottle of Jack Daniels, and a handful of dimes, symbolic echoes of a man who never did anything halfway. Tributes poured in from across the world, but none as succinct as Bono's. He was the 20th century. Larger than life, layered in contradiction, Sinatra was both myth and man. After a prolific career in music, film, and romance that spanned more than half a century, who stood to gain from Sinatra's death? The answer turned out to be several people. The inheritance that sparked quiet tension. As the spotlight dimmed on Frank Sinatra's legendary life, a quieter drama unfolded, one that didn't involve a microphone or a packed theater, but wills, wealth, and whispered expectations. When Sinatra passed away on May 14, 1998, at the age of 82, the world grieved the end of an era. But behind the closed doors of his family and estate attorneys, a different sort of reckoning was taking shape. Who would inherit the Sinatra legacy? Sinatra's will, made public weeks after his death, revealed a meticulous division of his massive estate. And while many received a share, some walked away with significantly more than others, sparking years of subtle tension and speculation. At the center of the fortune stood his fourth and final wife, Barbara Sinatra. Married to Frank for over 2 decades, Barbara inherited the largest portion of his estate, including $3.5 million in cash. A majority of his homes and properties, jewelry, vehicles, and valuable personal items. She was also granted control over his image and publicity rights, a powerful and profitable gift considering Sinatra's enduring popularity. His Malibu beach house, much of his Palm Springs estate, and proceeds from future licensing of his name and likeness were firmly in her hands. Frank's children from his first marriage to Nancy Barbato, Nancy, Tina, and Frank Jr., were each left $200,000 in cash and a shared 75% ownership in one of Sinatra's properties. More importantly, they were granted sole rights to most of his music catalog, securing not just a financial asset, but a symbolic hold on his artistic legacy. For Nancy and Tina, both of whom remained involved in managing their father's brand, this was perhaps more meaningful than the monetary amount itself. 2 of Sinatra's grandchildren were each given $500,000 in trust funds, totaling $1 million. Their identities weren't officially named in court filings, but the gesture was a clear attempt to extend his legacy into the next generation with purpose and care. In an unexpected yet deeply sentimental move, Sinatra also left $250,000 to his first wife, Nancy Barbato, the woman who had stood by him during his rise from a struggling singer in Hoboken to a global icon. Though they had divorced decades earlier, Sinatra's decision to include her in his final plans spoke volumes about his respect for their shared history. But it wasn't all family and sentiment. Several of Sinatra's closest friends, long-serving employees, and trusted colleagues were given 6-figure sums, a mark of the deep loyalty he inspired throughout his career. While names were mostly kept private, those within his circle knew who had earned his favor. Still, the reading of the will didn't unfold without its share of tension. Behind the scenes, there were rumors of strained relationships between Barbara and Sinatra's children, whispers of silent rivalries, disagreements over control, and quiet unease about how the estate was split. Publicly, the family maintained a united front, but Hollywood gossip hinted otherwise. After a prolific career in music, film, and romance that spanned more than half a century, who stood to gain from Sinatra's death? The answer turned out to be several people, but not everyone walked away feeling it was fair. But what do you think really caused the quiet tension behind Sinatra's inheritance? Loyalty, love, or lingering rivalries? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.